Okay, well, welcome. I've been asked to use a handheld microphone because apparently there's so much going on out there in Copenhagen with COP15 that the microport microphones interfere with police radio and all kinds of stuff going on out there. So that's why I'll be using this. But apparently these panel microphones will be safe as well because they're not portable. Welcome, my name is Martin Agerup. I am president of CPOS, Center for Political Studies here in Copenhagen. We'll be discussing the employment and growth effects of green jobs, of subsidizing green industries. We have some people in the room. We have some audiences on the web here in Denmark and in the US. But they won't be joining us for questions as far as I understand, so any questioning will be taking place in this room. We'll have short presentations from the studies, one from Dr. Calzada and one from Dr. Vance, Professor Vance, and on the Spanish and German study respectively, and then I'll be saying a little bit about our Danish windmill study. Let's go straight into it. Thank you very much for coming, and I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation. We'll start with you, Gabriel. Yes. If you could step over there. Should I stay here? Yes, please. Okay.
Well, thank you, Martin. Thank you, CPOS, for the invitation. I will try to summarize the findings of our study, and not only the findings of the study, a little bit also to give you a picture of what the Spanish experience on supporting or subsidizing renewable has been, and also in terms of the creation of green jobs. Of course, the whole idea of green jobs is related to the Kyoto Protocol and to the reduction of CO2, of greenhouse gas emissions. There are several ways to explain what the Kyoto Protocol is about. One of them is to show, or to explain in terms of rationing. In Spain, we have a large history in the rationing field. And when we speak about rationing, we have to understand that if you have a correlation like you have here between CO2 emissions and economic growth, and you want to change it, something will have to happen in the economy. This is the case of Spain. In the dark line is the GDP, and the light line is the CO2 emissions. Well, the Kyoto Protocol, the Spanish commitment, means that at that point here in 2001, until here is reality, what happened. And from here, we should have changed the emissions and the correlation between CO2 emissions and GDP growth. And of course, in order to do this, you need to change technology. And you need to do the government tried to do not only cap and trade, but to help cap and trade with some other laws. Those are some of the laws the Spanish government approved in order to comply with the Kyoto Protocol commitment. You will see here that we have several laws related to energy and renewables. Well, the Spanish, both Mr. Aznar government and Zapatero government, the Popular Party and the Socialist Party government, have been trying to help the renewable industry in order to fulfill the commitment. And the basic way is through what the European Union calls the energy of the future plan or energy of the future strategy. Of course, not that kind of windmills that I show here in the picture. Those are the kind of windmills we have in the Canary Islands from centuries. But with new technology related to renewables. And recently, also, several politicians, both in the US and in Europe, said that this will be a way to get out of the crisis, to create green jobs through the support of renewable energies, and in this way we would help the economy to get out of the crisis. And both in America and in Europe, many people have really believed that this was the solution for our financial crisis. We did a study trying to see what was exactly the experience, how much did it cost to Spain, this experience with renewables, and if it really creates those green jobs. We have become world leaders in the production of renewable energies in relative terms by any standard, and in absolute terms we are also number 1 and number 3 in several according to several measurements in renewable production. In order to become world leader, we need to produce a sort of green rain, in the sense of giving a lot of subsidies to technologies that were not ready to compete in the market. This green rain meant, in the case of Spain, subsidies up to 600% premiums over market price in solar, and over 100% premiums in wind energy. All these subsidies produce a very big bubble in the Spanish economy, related to the size of those renewable companies. In Spain we have today around 30,000 megawatts installed in renewable energies, and in wind around 16,000 megawatts right now. In solar over 3,000 megawatts. Basically every Spaniard wanted to enter a business where you had such high primes, and where the distributor of energy was obliged to buy you the energy. So we had waiting lists, very long waiting lists, with people wanting to get the license in order to produce this energy of the future. Of course, if you are here in the waiting list, you don't want to be there, you want to be here, you want to be the first. So corruption, a lot of corruption appeared related to the waiting list. Politicians immediately saw that there was a risky game to play with this bubble and all this waiting list and all this growing bubble. But they told the society that they knew how to handle the scheme. The problem is that the way the scheme is structured through what we call the feed-in price system, and the fact that we have related the success to the green job creation produces a very interesting scheme. If you want to say that you are producing green jobs, the problem is that most of the green jobs are related to installation of new fields. And the subsidies, the feed-in tariff is given to the production of energy. So if you want to maintain the green jobs, you have to produce new plants so that the people that are installing the plants can work and you can maintain the green jobs. But if you install new plants, you have more subsidies that you have to give. This is the bubble. So you have to pump more and more green air into the bubble in order to maintain the green jobs. If you put a cap, in the sense that if you place a limit to the amount of money you put into the bubble, you will have many people fired. So after all this experience, we have been until 31st of December last year, we put around 30 billion euros in subsidies into the renewables from year 2000 till 2008, and we create, according to the European Commission, more or less 50,000 green jobs related to those industry. This means that every green job costs about over €500,000 per green job created. And the big question is, who pays for this? Well, the distributor. This was a big question in Spain. Of course, politicians didn't want to pay for this because this was a huge amount of money, and they know that voters do not want to pay for this, and they invented a very interesting system by which the distributor have to pay for it. But the distributor said, hey, come on, if I have to pay for this, and then the price of energy to consumer is set by the government, I will get bankruptcy. They said, don't worry. The government said, don't worry. You pay now, but we will repay you in 15 years when somebody else is sitting here in office. And in the meantime, what you can do is you can do packages with this, what we owe you, and you can sell it in the financial market. You can do some structured product and sell it in the financial market. So this is what they are doing, and it's a huge amount of money. And this has created what we call the tariff deficit. And the tariff deficit, mainly produced by this scheme of renewables, is now about 16 billion euros size. And in the last year, they tried to sell this. The companies tried to sell this in the financial market, and due to the problems in the financial market, nobody wanted to buy this. And now the utilities have big troubles in order to refinance this debt. So if you take this big amount of money and you try, this is financial resources that you are taking out of the economy, and you just look how many jobs would the rest of the economy create with this 30 billion euros. The answer is that the economy will have created 2.2 jobs for every job that you have created in the renewable sector. Of course, the government saw the problem, have seen the problem, and said that the minister declared that green energy is clean but very costly, and they have this year reduced the subsidy by 30%, and they place a cap on new license they give for renewables. Since then, the companies have been firing many workers or green employees, and the bubble somehow bust. This is an example of solar companies firing thousands of green jobs. So from the green job creation during the years the bubble was growing, now we have turned to green unemployment, and many companies are declaring that they are firing workers because they cannot increase the number of workers they have if the bubble does not increase, if there is no more green subsidies put into the scheme. Also, we have the related problem of outsourcing. This system slowly, it shows that, well, the government has to increase the price because the years are passing, and the government has to increase the price of energy in order to pay the debt that they incurred already some 8 years ago or 7 years ago. And companies cannot compete with these higher energy prices, and there are several of them are leaving the country. For example, we have the case of Acerinox, the second largest state steel producer in the world, that is leaving Spain to the US and to South Africa because of high energy prices. And in fact, the government did a study on how much would have to increase the price in case we will have to pay this deficit created by the renewable scheme, and they said that it would have to be a 31% increase in the price of electricity on top of all what it has been increasing recently. So what is the consequence? Well, the consequence of this scheme is that this deficit produced mainly by the Feed-In Tariff system is deeply harming the system and puts at risk not only the financial situation of the sector companies, but also sustainability of the system itself. This adjustment turns out to be unsustainable and has grave consequences since it deteriorates the security and financial capacity of the investments necessary for providing electricity at the levels of quality and security that the Spanish society demands. I'm reading this not because, I do not know what it says, but because this is not my sentence. This is a quote from the minister. This is a quote from the Royal Decree of April 30th, 2009. This is what the government said 2 months after we released our study, and this is unfortunately what is happening in Spain. This whole system has put the electricity sector in a very risky situation, and also the labor market related to it in a very risky situation. This is why we do not get we do not understand very clear why Spain is the model as President Obama and other prominent politicians have been saying. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we should take the next presentation immediately, and then we can go on to questions afterwards. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Actually, I don't have a formal presentation, but it's compensation. I have copies of the report. So
let me hand it out. You can
okay.
take this.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Colin Vance. I'm from RWI, a research institute in Germany. And like Dr. Calzada, we prepared a report looking at the German experience with the promotion of renewable energies. Germany, actually, I think it's fair to say, is really the leader in terms of promoting renewable energies. I may stand corrected by this, but currently Germany has upwards of about 30,000 megawatts of installed renewable energy capacity, which puts it even above the United States, which has somewhere, I think, on the order of about 26,000 megawatts. So this is primarily from a mixture of wind and photovoltaics are the primary renewable energy sources that are being promoted, also to some extent hydro as well. And what we looked at in this particular report was the cornerstone of Germany's promotion of renewable energies, which is something called the Renewable Energies Act, which actually goes back quite a few years, and initially implemented in 1990, and it underwent a revision in 2000. And the centerpiece of this act is what's called a Feed-In Tariff. It's a similar scheme to what Dr. Calzada described for the case of Spain. Basically, the way it works in Germany, the way renewable energy is promoted, is that grid operators are obligated to take in any amount of renewable energy that's generated and pay a particular tariff for that amount. So no matter how much is created, they are obligated to accept and remunerate at particular rates the input of renewable energies into their grid, even though there may be other, obviously, conventional sources that they may be able to have cheaper. So long as renewable energy is flowing into the grid, they have to accept it. So what we looked at in this report was three things, really. We looked at the economic, and in particular the employment implications of this policy mechanism. We also looked at its environmental consequences. And finally, we looked at its implications for energy security. These are often three justifications that are provided for promoting renewable energies: employment, environmental gains, and energy security. And we essentially found on all three counts that the benefits were negligible, if not negative, if not counterproductive. So I'll just briefly run through each of the cases, first looking at its implications for employment. The first thing to recognize here is that the promotion of renewable energies is extremely costly. So for example, the feed-in tariff required to make photovoltaic energy competitive in Germany is on the order of about 43 cents per megawatt hour. So a grid operator has to pay 43 cents per megawatt hour to allow for energy coming from photovoltaics into the grid. Now, the conventional costs of energy production in Germany is somewhere between 2 to 7 cents. So this is a huge increase over what it would otherwise cost using conventional energy sources to allow energy into the grid. And ultimately, those increased costs are then passed on to consumers in the form of higher electricity bills. So it's roughly, in Germany, electricity costs about 20 cents for consumers per megawatt hour, of which the Feed-In Tariff scheme accounts for about 7.5% of a typical household's electricity bill. Looking at it from another angle, in terms of the amount it costs per job created, we calculate that if you look at the total amount that's allocated in feed-in tariffs, in the case of photovoltaics, it amounts to about 175,000 euros for each job created in the sector. So that's obviously much higher than the average wage rate in Germany. So it's an extremely costly method of producing jobs, and one that ultimately isn't very constructive, even in terms of the absolute numbers of jobs created. Germany's environmental industry, and this we reproduce this in the report. It may have been a strategic blunder because we reproduce a chart that they have showing that there's on the order of about 280,000 jobs created in the renewable sector. But as is often the case, one has to distinguish, and this is generally not done, between gross employment effects and net employment effects. So the chart you see is gross employment effects. If you look at the net employment effects, there's been countless studies that have done so. Dr. Calzada has been one of them. And we've also looked into this matter in some of our other research and have done surveys of the academic literature on this. What you actually find is the net effects end up being a negative, are zero, if not a bit negative. And the simple reason is that the promotion of renewable energies is a drain on resources. It's a drain on economic activity. It leaves firms with less money for investment. It leaves households with less disposable income. And this often ultimately has negative impacts on economic growth. The argument that because it's often said that renewable energies are relatively labor intensive and therefore an excellent mechanism for job creation, but this argument really doesn't make much sense if you think about it on the face of it. If it was really about creating jobs, we could, all go back into agriculture and throw away our laptops and ratchet down the productivity of the economy, and certainly lots of jobs would be created, but it wouldn't do much for standard of living. In terms of the environmental impacts of Germany's Renewable Energy Act and this Feed-In Tariff, there the issue that's really central is the fact that you have multiple policies in place, and I think this is something that really I'm hoping politicians will take away from the conference. That is the danger of having simultaneously different policy mechanisms in place to promote renewable energies. And in Germany's case, Germany is participating in the European Trading Scheme, which puts a binding cap on carbon emissions. Now, this cap is indeed binding, so what you end up getting with this Renewable Energy Act is that any emissions that are thereby saved end up just getting spit out in the forms of emission certificates, because to the extent that you are saving emissions, you're creating excess carbon that you can then sell as a certificate that ends up just getting emitted in some other form through trading. So what we find there is that the environmental impacts are actually zero as well. And then finally, looking at the implications for energy security, this is another common argument that's made in support of renewable energies, and One of the things that to keep in mind there is that renewable energies really are dependent on either the wind blowing or the sun shining, and because both of these things are highly intermittent, especially in Germany, which isn't a particularly sunny place. You need a backup system, and one that basically operates it at 100%, because we all want to be able to switch on the lights switch on demand or turn on our computers, and we don't want it going out with the vagaries of the weather. So you have to have a backup system in place when you're using a renewable energy source. And typically, what does this backup system rely on? Typically, it relies on fossil fuels. And in Germany's case, the backup system is primarily based on gas. This has its own costs. You need to pay for the maintenance of such a system, which amount to about just under $1 billion a year just for its maintenance. But then you also have to sort of raise the fundamental question: is have you really increased your energy security by virtue of requiring such a backup system? Germany imports about 36% of its gas from Russia, which in the last few years has not always shown itself to be the most reliable source for gas imports. So on this score as well, a lot of the purported benefits just don't ultimately manifest themselves. So this, we ultimately advocate that there's different ways. The report abstracts from whether all these the discussions about keeping temperature rise to 2 degrees, or how much CO2 should what kind of caps. We abstract from that. What we really look at is, let's say, given that you agree that we need some kind of environmental policy in place. What we really advocate is just be careful of what policies you do, because it can have huge implications for the costs. And typically, I think governments tend to prefer regulatory and/or subsidies and tariffs, and these tend to be the most costly ways of promoting new technologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vance. I'll just speed on. I'm both the moderator and the presenter here, so we're running a lean and efficient operation. And I'll just give you a brief run over of the employment effects of the Danish windmill study that came out in September this year. And just to start by putting this into perspective, what we're really discussing... Oh, just a second. Where's this? Well, we're not putting up a straw man here. It is actually part of the debate that President Obama and politicians all over the world are arguing that there's some kind of win-win situation here, that we need to do something about global warming, but fortunately what we decide to do will be a benefit to the economy and to employment as well. So there's a win-win, as Obama says here. He says that you need to do something about the global warming, and you can use wind energy, and that will create 250,000 jobs. So it's really a win-win. And it's two separate arguments. Should we do something about global warming? What should we do about global warming? That's one argument. The other is it a win-win? And it's important to realize, I think, that it is not so simple just to claim that putting money into green technologies creates a win-win with higher economic growth and higher employment. And Denmark is certainly a case that proves that point. But also from a more sort of fundamental point of view, can governments create jobs? I mean, let's have a look at that idea. How are jobs created in a society? This is a graph showing the link between the average growth of the workforce and the average employment growth across a number of countries over a period of about 20 years. And as you can see, there's a very, very clear link between workforce growth, and employment growth. So in that sense, I guess governments can do something to create jobs. They can increase labor supply. And how do you increase labor supply? Well, in a country like Denmark, it's very easy. We have an early retirement scheme where you sponsored by the government can go on early retirement even if you're fit and fit for fight. You could abolish that. You can do stuff like that. That's how governments can increase employment. They can increase the incentive to work. They can create an environment in which it makes sense to work longer hours, to work more years, to start working earlier, stuff like that. But there's very little indications that governments can do anything else. I mean, there's almost a one-to-one link between the supply of labor, the number of people in the workforce, and employment. And this is something that I think it's fair to say most economists agree on. The governments can't actually do much to create employment in the long run. So if you look at Denmark, what has actually happened with the windmill study, so just to go back to this for a brief second, with the windmill experience, is that yes, we have now 20, 25, 28,000 people employed in the windmill sector. But that's a shift of employment from other sectors to the windmill sector. That's what's happened. And Denmark was experiencing full employment up until this crisis. And when the crisis is over, at some point there'll be full employment again. You could argue that you need green jobs during the crisis, but that's not a structural policy. That would be sort of Keynesian pump priming type of activity. And I don't think that's what we're discussing here. We're discussing whether governments can long-term create extra employment by subsidizing green jobs. And that's not what has happened in Denmark. We had full employment, and those people who got jobs in the windmill sector could easily have been employed elsewhere. But then again, in the short run, there is an argument. You could argue that if there are certain geographic areas where there's high unemployment, you could try and subsidize certain types of activities in those areas. And then if you do that, why not do it by subsidizing green jobs, which has an environment impact as well. But that's not actually what has happened in the case of Denmark. If you look at where the green jobs, where the windmill jobs are, it's not in specifically depressed areas. And if you look at the types of people in employment, it's not particularly types of jobs that has high unemployment. So, but let's just create an optimistic short-run estimate and say that about 10% of the jobs created are new jobs, because there is an element of geography or an element of certain types of jobs that has high unemployment to start out with. And if we assume that, we're talking about a subsidy in Denmark of about 90 to 140,000 US dollars per job, or 175 to 200% of what the average pay in the sector is. So this is basically just a calculation showing a kind of case study of, you know, even allowing for some kind of effect, it doesn't seem to be a very sensible way to create jobs. It's a very expensive way of creating jobs. The other way to look at it is, well, that's fine. Well, maybe it's a good idea that government shifts employment from some type of employment to another, if those jobs are more productive. I guess the theoretical problem with that argument is, why would people not by themselves shift to more productive employment? But I guess you could argue that maybe governments see the light before business. It's unlikely, but you could argue that. But that is not the case with the Danish windmill sector. If you take the energy technology industry, of which 75% is windmills in Denmark. It has a lower value added per employee than the industry average. So in other words, what the government subsidy has done, which is an indirect subsidy by the way, it's a subsidy that plays out through consumers paying a higher electricity price. What the government subsidy has done is basically to shift employment from higher productivity sectors to a lower productivity sector. And so the value added per employee in the energy sector is about 13% lower. And the result of shifting employment in that direction has been to lower productivity and thus economic growth in the economy overall by about 1.8 billion Danish kroner. That's $270 million US at the exchange rate in September. The dollar's moving up and down quite a lot. It doesn't sound like a lot of money, but it's certainly not a case for arguing that there's a win-win. There's not. It costs money. And on top of that, there are other costs of subsidizing windmills. First of all, consumers are in Denmark paying the highest electricity price in Europe because they have to subsidize this thing, and that's not only because of but that's the important thing to realize is that it is only household consumers who pay this. Industrial consumers pay a much lower price. That's because Denmark, the Danish politicians are not stupid. They know that we have a small open economy and that businesses can easily move outside Denmark, whereas consumers tend to have other things causing them to stay in the country. They have family and friends and obligations and jobs. They know the language. That's the way Danish politicians think taxation. We also have very high marginal tax rates in Denmark, third highest in the world, whereas corporate taxes in Denmark are below average in a global comparison. So small open economy, this is how politicians would choose to run things, tax consumers. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a cost to the economy. The money spent on the higher electricity prices will not be spent on other types of consumption, so there's a cost there as well. And there's also, even from this, a distortionary effect. This is similar to taxation, and there's a distortionary effect on employment as well. Last but not least, if you look at what different climate economists in a range of different studies, this is a meta study by Richard Toll, a range of different studies tell us that the sensible price that we should be willing to pay to avoid carbon emissions should lie somewhere around a couple of dollars, or maybe up to as high as, let's take the highest estimate available, the Stern review, which is clearly an outlier, but let's use that as the maximum reasonable price to pay. And if you look at the costs of avoiding carbon emissions using windmills in Denmark, it's higher than even the Stern review. So from an economic perspective, even from a climate economic perspective, windmills do not really make sense in a Danish context. I think that was my last slide. Yes, it was. And that ends my part of the presentation. And if the two of you will come up here, we can face questions. Thank you very much.
A question for Dr. Calzada. My name is William Yateman. I work at the Competitive Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. We learned that the impact of solar feed-in tariffs on German electricity prices. We know that the Danes pay the most or Danish households, I should say, pay the most for electricity in Europe. Government sets the rates in Spain. Will there be a price impact? I mean, is that the only way to say? You said that the industry, the electricity industry, is in turmoil thanks to this burden, this tariff burden, feed-in tariff burden. Do you see? I mean, is there any way out for the industry besides raising electricity prices in Spain?
Well, there have been negotiations this year between electricity industry and the government because of this problem. And what the deal is the following. The government will try not to use this scheme anymore, I mean the deficit scheme anymore. We'll try to reduce the use of it. And they will try to pay part of it through increase of electricity rates and part of it through new taxation to the taxpayers. So because it was obvious that if you want to pay everything through increase of the rate, even the government was saying that it was we would have to increase at 31%, and this was not this would not be unacceptable for anyone. So they're going to probably raise 18% and the rest pay through taxes.
Bertel Lohmann Andersen from Denmark. I have a question concerning Germany. There is a rather vivid discussion in Germany about the price of electricity. And I watch German television and always try to see when it will appear what the reason is. But it is always the greed of the stromproducenten. We have not yet heard much there about the renewable energy problem. Am I right, or have I misunderstood the German television?
I think you're absolutely right. It's interesting. I mean, among the German public, there's actually, according to surveys, which aren't necessarily accurate because of the way questions are posed, but there is a lot of support, in fact, for renewable energy among the German populace. I don't think often the connection is made in the abstract between the notion of supporting renewable energies and the real immediate implications it has for electricity bills. I would be the first to confess before working on this topic, I myself wasn't aware of how much the feed-in tariff was adding to my own electricity bill. If you had asked me 4 months ago, I would have been clueless. So I think people don't make this connection, even though it has quite a real impact on their purchasing power. But in Germany as well, I mean, there is also some rethinking going on, especially with the new coalition government. They're talking about Germany had plans to totally phase out nuclear energy, but there's now some talk that they will be putting the brakes on that. As it is, nuclear share has gone down quite a bit since 2000, but that may stabilize.
Wonderful. Dr. Vance, based upon what you just said, so evidently the impact upon the price of electricity of this feed-in tariff has yet to has not affected the politics. People aren't clamoring about it. Is the energy security argument, I mean, as I understand it, that's the entire reason for the stay on the nuclear moratorium, is the fear of energy insecurity. Is that argument making any headway amongst the German people, do you know, in terms of a backlash?
I think it's starting to, and I think there's also a growing awareness that by ruling out nuclear as part of Germany's energy mix, it doesn't ultimately do it because it'll just make Germany more dependent on imports, like from France, which is heavily reliant on nuclear power. So even if you are against nuclear power, you're not really solving the problem by increasing your imports from countries that are heavily reliant on it. The points I made earlier about energy security, the fact that that backup systems are required, and these themselves cost a lot of money, and they tend to rely on fossil fuel sources, which in turn are imported and in part from places that aren't always such reliable suppliers. I don't think this is resonating in people's minds. As I think on the surface, if you ask people, about energy security, most would say, well, yeah, the sun is a reliable source, the wind is reliable, we always have it, so it should improve our energy security. So I don't think this connection about requiring a backup system, which then in turn is dependent on fossil fuels, is something in the public's mind.
Allow me just to add something to that, using the case of Denmark. Denmark produces about 20% of its electricity via windmills, but we only manage to consume half of that ourselves because the wind is not necessarily blowing at times when we need the electricity. So about half of the electricity is being exported to Norway and Sweden mostly. And basically what's happening is we're using, the Norwegians are almost 100% hydro, so they have hydro dams. And what the Norwegians do is they turn down the electricity production from the dams when they're using the cheap Danish electricity, at times when there's excess electricity. And they're basically storing, in some ways you can say, the water level in the dams is storing some of the Danish wind electricity. Now that's a fine solution in some ways, but it's a very expensive solution because we're selling the electricity cheaply, we're producing it very expensively, selling it very cheaply, below even market prices, and certainly below the production prices. That's one point that's worth mentioning. The other is in terms of making windmills a sort of global proposition is, if you don't have Norway next door, you have to think about how to solve the storage problem. We happen to have Norway next door, but most countries don't. And we have an interconnector to Norway that's very expensive. How would the U.S., for instance, solve that problem? How would other countries solve that problem of storing wind electricity, or any electricity for that matter? Solar electricity is another issue. As long as we don't have a good solution for the storage problem, we can't say that the energy sufficiency or the energy security problem has been solved. And one way they're trying to solve it in Denmark is to introduce electric cars. But a problem with that is they don't drive very far before you need to change the battery. We don't know how the public is going to react to it. What happens if people don't want electric cars? Are we going to force them? There's lots of issues here, and there's a lot of talk about the smart grid, but until now that's just a slogan. You had a comment on that?
I was going to
Gabriel?
say more or less the same as you. In Spain we don't have interconnection. Well, we have a very tiny, small interconnection with France and with Portugal, but it's about less than 5% of the electric market in Spain. So what we are doing basically with all the surplus, basically the surplus produced in the night, is that we are trying to use it for take the water up in the dams, so that we have the water. We bring the water down up, so that we can reuse the water again. But this is not enough, and what the government is trying to do is to push the electric car to charge the batteries during the night. And this is a huge national program now, and behind this program is exactly what you said.
What is the actual situation about nuclear energy in Spain? I have heard they have decided to phase it out, but for instance in Belgium they have postponed this phasing out. Is anything happening in Spain?
In Spain, the government has closed down 2 nuclear power plants in the last 4 years. And officially in their program, the program of the government is to close all of them. However, it looks like in the last week they have contacts with the Popular Party because they have realized that, well, in terms of Kyoto Protocol, we are right now 50% over base year, 1990. And our limit, our commitment was maximum 15% over 1990. So the government has somehow realized that they have realized that the renewables cost a lot of money, that they cannot continue increasing this huge amount of billions that they are putting into the renewables, and they have realized that they might have to use at least a little bit the nuclear in order to reduce CO2 emissions. But this has been a big change in the last week. We have heard about it, that the government is dealing with the opposition in order to at least not to close the nuclear plants.
No further questions? Well, in that case, I'll take the opportunity to thank Dr. Vance and Dr. Calzada for coming here, for presenting your studies, and thanks to everyone for attending.